The night the canvas breathed. The wind whispered a warning no one could hear. File 7B, Obscura Archive, records the first day. I watched the 9 of them gather at the edge of the Ural foothills, each a seasoned soul forged by countless polar treks. Their boots, scarred by frost, clicked against the packed snow as they loaded sleds with birch bark stoves, dried meat, and a single white canvas tent. It seemed stitched by hand. The sky was a steel vault, clouds low enough to brush the pine crowns, and the temperature sank to minus 30 degrees before sunrise. Yet optimism crackled between them like the tiny flames of their portable lanterns. Mikhail, the lead surveyor, unfolded the tent with deliberate care, his breath forming ghostly ribbons that vanished as quickly as his doubts. He spoke of a forgotten route marked on an 1887 Russian topographic map, a corridor through the forest that promised a clear ridge for their winter camp. Beside him, Anya, the botanist, checked her field notebook, noting the lichen that clung to the north-facing rocks, a sign of stable microclimates. The rest of the party, 2 geologists, a meteorologist, a photographer, and a guide from the local Yakut community, checked their instruments, calibrated barometers, and tested the radios that would keep them linked to the nearest outpost, 100 kilometers away. The sled dogs yelped, eager to move, and the convoy set off, the snow swallowing their tracks like ink on parchment. We entered the wilderness with hope bright enough to melt the ice, unaware that the tent they carried would soon open from within. The night fell like a shroud over the ridge, and the wind began its mournful chant, rattling the pine branches until they sang with a metallic keening. I watched the hikers lower their packs, their breaths turning to vapor that vanished as quickly as a whispered secret. The ground, a hard crust of ice, gave way beneath their boots to a layer of fresh powder that swallowed each step, leaving only faint crescents in the white. They erected the canvas shelter with practiced hands, the fabric snapping into place as if it too were aware of the storm's intent. Inside, a thin line of lantern light flickered, casting long shadows that danced on the canvas walls. Outside, the temperature plunged, the air turning razor-sharp, each inhalation a bite to the throat. Snow began to fall in relentless sheets, each flake a cold finger probing the seams of the tent. The wind grew louder, a hollow howl that seemed to come from the abyss itself, and the canvas shivered, then sighed. I could feel the structure becoming a fragile island in a sea of white, isolated and trembling. Their voices, low and tentative, tried to hold warmth, but the night pressed in, an invisible weight pressing on the roof. The fabric stretched, the poles creaked, and for a heartbeat I sensed something shift from within, an imperceptible opening, a breath of the unknown slipping through the stitches. The tent, once a refuge, was beginning to breathe with the storm. Snow piled at the base, sealing the perimeter like a silent coffin. The pines beyond the firelight were black silhouettes, their branches bowed under the weight. A faint creak rose from within the canvas, as if the tent itself inhaled the storm. I heard the crunch of boots on frozen pine needles before the lights of the rescue team pierced the gloom. Their lanterns swung, casting trembling halos that fell upon the torn canvas, revealing the wound that ran like a scar across the fabric. I could feel the tension in the air, the way the storm's breath seemed to still, as if the tent itself were holding its sigh. From the inside, the tear was clean, a stark line that cut the canvas as if a blade had slipped through unseen hands. The fabric hung unevenly, a ragged edge flaring outward, exposing the hollow darkness that had once been concealed. I watched the rescuers lean in, their faces illuminated by the amber glow, eyes searching for any sign of what lay beyond that breach. Footprints emerged from the opening, a disordered procession into the snow. Some were bare, the heels pressed into the powder, leaving deep, solitary imprints that vanished with each gust. Others bore the thin, frayed socks of a child's winter shoes, the wool thread catching the light in a faint, ghost-like sheen. The path they traced was erratic, as if the wearer had stumbled, turned, and fled in panic, then paused, then moved again. I noted the rhythm of the prints, 2, 3, a sudden gap, like a heartbeat that skipped. The cold wind whispered through the slit, carrying a faint scent of pine resin and something metallic, faint as rust. The rescuers exchanged a look, silent, aware that the fabric's betrayal was not merely a tear, but an invitation. I closed the file, the image lingering behind my eyes, a reminder that some openings are not meant to be entered, but to be observed. I arrived at the ridge just as the sun slipped behind the spruce-laden horizon, the air thin enough to taste the frost on my tongue. The canvas, once a shelter, now lay torn open like a wound. It seems frayed by the night's relentless wind. Inside, the snow had hardened around 2 figures, each frozen in a tableau of unnatural stillness. The first lay on its back, the coat of a hiker still buttoned, the boots pressed into the ice as if trying to push forward. Its throat was a clean absence. The tongue, a small, pale fragment, lay half buried in the snow, removed with a precision no animal could achieve. The second body, curled on its side, bore a different story. Its ribs were crushed, the lungs collapsed, yet the skin showed no cut, no abrasion, only the pallor of death in sub-zero air. Forensic analysis later confirmed what the cold had already whispered. Severe internal trauma, bruised organs, broken ribs, and a ruptured sternum, all without a single external laceration. In the Dyatlov Pass, a similar tragedy unfolded a century ago, where hikers were discovered with comparable injuries, tongues and eyes missing, their bodies preserved in a crystal-clear freeze that kept the details unervingly vivid. I traced a finger along the torn seam, feeling the frayed fibers bite into my skin, and imagined the moment the fabric gave way. Not merely a breach, but an invitation for something unseen to slip inward. The silence was not empty. It was a held breath, a pause in the world's narrative. I closed the file in my mind, the image of those 2 bodies lingering like a question waiting for an answer, a question I am still compelled to ask. At the moment the sample reached the lab, the air was thick with the metallic scent of cold steel, the hum of fluorescence a low backdrop to the quiet that followed. I watched the technicians place the torn fabric from the tent onto the tray of the Geiger, Muller tube, the needle trembling as it swept through the invisible field. Their instruments whispered a faint hiss, a count that rose just above background, a whisper of ionizing particles clinging to the fibers. The numbers were small, 2 to 3 counts per minute above the ambient level, but they were consistent across 3 independent devices, each calibrated to the same standard set after the Chernobyl surveys. It was enough to turn curiosity into a question and questions into theory. One analyst, recalling declassified reports from the 1950s, suggested the tent might have been a test site for a covert radiological experiment, a field of low-dose exposure designed to study material degradation. Another, more inclined toward the anomalous, spoke of exotic phenomena, quantum vacuum fluctuations that could imprint a trace of radiation without a conventional source. I felt the weight of those possibilities settle like dust on the canvas of the file. The cloth, once a simple shelter, now bore a silent signature of the unseen. It was not proof, but a clue, a faint glow in the darkness of what we think we know. And as the data logged, the narrative stretched further, inviting a deeper look into the shadows that the world prefers to ignore. I closed the folder with a sigh that feels more like the wind slipping through the alpine passes. The photographs, the trembling logs, the last transmission, each a fragment of a puzzle that refuses to fit. What pushed the canvas to tear itself from the inside remains a whisper, a pressure we cannot measure, a force that seemed to pulse with the very heartbeat of the stone. Some have called it a vortex, others a tremor of the earth. But the instruments recorded nothing beyond a fleeting surge of energy, a shimmer that vanished before any sensor could name it. The witnesses speak of a cold that seeped into their bones, of a light that flickered like a dying star, and of a silence that followed, louder than any avalanche. I have traced every footnote, cross-checked every temperature reading, even consulted the old miners who swore the mountains guard their stories. Yet the answer stays hidden, as stubborn as the granite cliffs that loom over the valley. It is tempting to fill the gap with myth, to imagine a guardian spirit or a crack in reality itself. But the truth, as always, is quieter, still waiting for a hand to lift the veil. So I leave this file as I found it, incomplete, inviting those who listen to look deeper, to question what is known. Should you crave more of these hidden chapters, consider subscribing, and I will return with another sealed file from the Obscura Archive. The archive never closes.